I am up, Chris. Can you hear me?
Okay. All right. Awesome. Yeah, Jeff, take it away.
All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome to Strategic Leaders Academy RAMP Workshop number 4. Strengthen your culture as you lead through the COVID crisis. Some admin notes and ground rules to ensure we have the most productive use of our time together. First, please use the chat room to make comments and the Q&A box to ask questions of the presenters. Our COO, Nicole, will be monitoring those areas. We will check in with her along the way. We're going to do a quick test now, and I'd ask that you leave one word in the chat box to ensure everyone can hear and is dialed in. So go, please light up that chat box. How we doing, Nicole?
Yeah, it looks like everyone's able to use it, so we should be good to go.
All right, sounds good. So in previous sessions, we introduced the RAMP model for the major crisis life cycle, starting with the react phase, where we predominantly remain in the COVID-19 response, and we have government leaders reacting to the crisis with huge changes to the environment and economy. These are external to our business and outside of our control. The upcoming adjust phase is where leaders will get better knowledge and data on the timeline and effects of the crisis on their organization, and will make more informed adjustments to their mission and strategy to find their new normal. That leads to the manage phase of their new normal and how they will prosper again. We talked about how to avoid staring at the pothole and get beyond the react phase by offering 5 shifts for your organization to consider in order to quickly find your new normal and prosper, as depicted on the green light on this chart. This week's webinar is the next iterative step in arming you with ideas and tips to help you lead through the crisis. Here are our goals and agenda for today's session. I'll give you a few moments to take those in. This session is designed for CEOs, founders, senior executives, nonprofit executive directors, and sports coaches, because you're in charge of people who are relying on you to make good decisions during this unprecedented time, and because now a culture is revealing itself. And we need to leverage this opportunity to refine, build, or create the culture that we want in our new normal.
Hey, Jeff, I'm going to keep the poll up for about another minute. So if you haven't had a chance to complete the poll yet, just tell us what your top leadership challenge is right now. Okay, thanks. Back over to you, Jeff.
Great, thanks, Chris. So here's our Strategic Leaders Academy team. Starting on the left is Eric Kober, Nicole Kaus, our COO, Chris Kalenda, our founder, me, Jeff Marquez, to Chris's left, then John O'Grady and Tom Lucier on your far right. We help you achieve sustainable growth and success for your team. We work with you because you are in charge. You are responsible and accountable for the success of a business, nonprofit, government agency, athletic team, and the people you lead. We know what it's like to be in charge, to be responsible for success and failure, to make decisions that affect people's lives and livelihood, to live with the consequences of those decisions, and to learn. We know what it's like to be in your shoes. We've led organizations successfully in combat, crisis, and peacetime. We have advanced degrees in subjects related to leadership, culture, and strategy, and over 150 years of combined experience leading people and teams. We've undergone extensive training and study to turn that knowledge into best practices that work for your business, nonprofit, government agency, and team. That's why our clients have already grown by over $25 million annually in counting. We want to have that same impact for you. First, let's take about 30 seconds to look at the pictures on the next slide. Pick one that best describes what you're going through right now in your organization and why. In a moment, We're going to ask you to respond using the chat function. So there you go. Pick the picture that describes what you're experiencing right now. What do we see in Nicole?
We've got the question mark and the canoe. Chris says the canoe rowing hard. Kit, the mountains. We feel like we are forever climbing. Gordon, the archery target, and flowers blooming, says Tom. Want to get out of this crisis and move ahead, which is the same thing that I was going to say. And then Ray notes the candlelight.
Okay, great. Thanks, folks. Now, let's look at why culture is so important. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we got it, Jeff.
Okay, there we go. A 2017 Gallup poll reports that nearly 70% of American employees are unengaged at work, a figure that rises to 90% worldwide. So just imagine nearly 7 out of 10 employees find their work to be a soul-sucking experience. Get culture wrong, and as the numbers show, people leave, and you are now facing about a $14,000 bill to fill an entry-level position, and a middle manager or a senior leader will cost you about a year's worth of their salary. Leaders, middle managers, and employees were thrust into distributed environments almost overnight in this COVID-19. And for those whose culture is rooted in trust, commitment, and common good, they're likely faring pretty well. On the other hand, those who have culture wrong, leaders and employees are frustrated, strategy is forgotten, and for them, the struggle continues. Unfortunately, in those instances, organizations may crumble. Before we go any further, let's first define culture. And I like our simple definition here: your team's behavioral and performance norms. What you do in the halls and Zoom calls is more important than what you write on the walls. And for me, the third bullet rings so true because I survived having a Grand Canyon between top leaders and frontline employees. This culture clash meant that in an employee survey, we went from a top 10 organization to a bottom 400. At one check, we had lost 40% of our technical and scientific expertise. It did not end well with the senior leader being removed. And that just goes to show you the power of culture. As I mentioned, a culture is revealing itself in this crisis. And so it's a good time to measure the level of commitment and the common good as shown on the squad chart. If you have a well-defined common good and a low level of commitment, you are operating in what we call a compliant culture, where coercion is used to gain desired behavior. It's a carrot and stick kind of approach. And while there are guideposts to orient, folks just haven't bought in for whatever reason. It may be an issue of trust, perhaps respect. And as you can imagine, it requires intensive supervision that limits strategic thinking and development. Think of a sales-oriented type business. Now, if you have a poorly defined common good and a low level of commitment, you're operating in what we call a chaotic culture, characterized by toxic and dominant behavior. And it's usually the office alphas running things. There's no trust, no respect, and when things start going bad, people will scurry for self-preservation. If you have a poorly defined common good and a high level of commitment, you're operating in a contingent culture, where teammates typically have great chemistry. Think of an entity where the founder and original employees are still around. They rally around an informal, undefined common good. They have an implicit understanding of what's important. But with growth and changes in people, the implicit common good begins to fade. And with that may go to trust. And if they're not careful, they may slide over to chaotic. Finally, If you have a well-defined common good and a high level of commitment, you are operating in an empowered culture where there is a high degree of trust. Leaders can think and act strategically because their core, their middle management, the heart and soul of their organization is strong. Their behavior is the same, whether the leader is present or absent. They have their guideposts and have a green light to make decisions because they know they have the trust and support of their leadership. So, where are you? Well, today we'll provide you with 5 actions to help you get you to the empowered corner. 5 actions you can take now. So, let's dive in. Using the quad, step 1 is to understand your current culture by asking a series of questions. What you see is not inclusive, and so add away. This is your chance to be honest and vulnerable with yourself initially. As you plot your answers, think about who else you're going to ask to answer the same question. And don't let it be one of your clones or your besties. In fact, have the courage to seek someone who thinks differently than you and someone you trust. Step 2 is to create a team, share your findings, and ask for their help to help you determine actions that will help move the organization to the empowered corner. Welcome any new feedback that they may offer. Some other empowering activities are taking your mentor program to the next level by delegating, empowering your middle management, and engaging in reviving the common good, which Chris will cover in the next action. Lastly, give culture its place in your organization. It is one of the 3 legs of the stool, the organizational trinity, if you will, along with strategy and leadership. Like promoting a new strategy, promote culture, but before you do, honor the past. Chances are that many of your employees put a lot of energy and purpose into their work, and it should be recognized. Give it its proper due. And then prepare your teams for any changes, and most of all, be a champion of culture. And remember, your mic is always on, and someone is always watching. Be authentic, be human, and let that openness be your advantage. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Chris Belinda, to take us through the values factor. But before I do, I'd like to share a bit of what others think of Chris and the great work that he does. Dustin Smith, COO at Aspire Allergy and Science. Chris is so easy to work with. Leaders have so much on the plate. Having someone easy to work with who listens and is interested solely in helping us achieve our goals was terrific and made it easy. Our conversion rates have increased, so revenues have already increased by about 10%. Ownership at mid-level has made our C-level jobs much easier, and we can focus on the strategic challenges and not have to worry about internal problems. Now, what's not on the slide is that while Chris was at Aspire, he had an allergic reaction. And so on that day, Chris was the crisis, but it turned out just fine. Over to you, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, that was a significant emotional experience. So I was doing some work with Aspire Allergy, and they offered as a part of the work to give me some allergy tests because I'm an allergy sufferer. And so I jumped at the chance. I said yes. This became a classic example of making your values explicit and putting your values into action because Aspire did it so well. Once I got in the allergy test, they take you through a couple of phases. I began to get into, I began to have an anaphylactic reaction. So, multiple combat tours, Ranger School, close quarters combat, all of this. And I was getting taken down by a blade of grass known as Timothy grass. And throat began to constrict. I began having this anaphylactic reaction. And when the team saw that, they swung immedately into action. So go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead. Yeah. That's me getting carted off in the gurney after, after they essentially did their battle drill. So one of their values was teamwork. And And they had listed explicitly what each person does in the event of a crisis, like this, somebody going into anaphylactic shock. So go ahead, Jeff, next slide. And this is the 4 of them. And I got them together the next day. So yeah, we're fully recovered and we're doing a day-long workshop. Fortunately, I was fully recovered. But before the workshop started, I asked them to get together just to say thanks, for saving my life. And they were so good. I said, how many times you guys go through this? I figured it was mainly like, I don't know, once every couple of weeks, somebody had a highly adverse reaction to something. And Sadie, who is to my left, so it's Kristen, Sadie, Laura, and Latoya. We're the dream team there. She says, this is the first time we've ever seen anything this severe, and we just simply did our battle drill. All of our training kicked off. We knew exactly what we had to do, and it kind of went like clockwork. And I was amazed that this is the first time they'd ever seen it. But it goes to show you the power when you make your values explicit and everybody understands their role in that value. So in this case, it was teamwork and everybody understood that what they'd like to do. So go ahead and build, Jeff. And once again, thanks to all of you for saving my life that day. Go ahead with the next slide. So another example of when our values maybe were not as explicit. So this is a picture of me in Afghanistan with Nathan Springer. So Rachel is your brother. You've probably seen this picture. Andrea, her brother is on the webinar. So we appreciate you being here, Andrea. And we had done a great job of protecting civilians. So much so that in 2009, General McChrystal asked me to come out with him and help him on a number of things. And one of those was reducing civilian casualties, because in his words, the civilian casualties were, we're losing this war. Go ahead with the bill, Jeff. And what would happen is when there was civilian harm caused by either Afghan forces or international forces, people would actually start to support the Taliban as people who are protecting them. I mean, imagine if the North Korean army or the Chinese army were in your neighborhood, started shooting the place up. I don't know about you, but I'd kind of go Red Dawn on them. And that's what a lot of Afghans were doing. And so General McChrystal said, hey, let's take those same principles of protecting the population, avoiding civilian casualties, and apply them here. So he came out with a new policy about this. But then what happened was your classic game of telephone tag. So go ahead with the next build, Jeff. So at the 2-star level, you began to, when General McChrystal said, hey, let's protect the population, but I don't want to put any restrictions on the use of force. At the 2-star level and below, they started just trying to, with all the best of intentions, started adding some restrictions and approval levels for use of airstrikes and other things when somebody was in a firefight. And then, of course, as you get further down the chain, go ahead and build, you get more restrictions that people were applying to it. And then finally, at the captain level, it's like, hey, wait a minute. I'm in these firefights and I'm not getting the responsive support that I need. And so as the command found out about this and saw what was happening, they recognized, the general recognized that, hey, I actually need to be much more explicit about this and say, look, you cannot add restrictions to this. I just want people to use their heads before they drop a bomb. So if you don't make your values explicit in terms of what those leader and employee behaviors are, you can get misunderstandings down the chain as what happened for a period of time in Afghanistan until it got corrected. So let's find out. Let's talk about some ways to make those values explicit. Go ahead, next slide, please, Jeff. Or yeah, Jeff, thanks. So one way is just keep it simple and eat the elephant one bite at a time. So when you're in a weekly meeting, just take one value each week. So that's step one. So decide you're going to be intentional about this. Step two is discuss how that value contributes to your vision and mission. So why is this value important to us? Why do we have it? Why do we list it? Step three is talk with the team and gain input on what the leader and employee behaviors are that contribute to that value. And you can do that either as part of the Zoom call, you can use a Google form, you get anonymous input, etc. But gain people's views on what are the right leader and employee behaviors that constitute this value. Once you've got all that, you can set those expectations very clearly. And then finally is uphold the standards fairly and evenly. I mean, if there's a double standard, if the standards apply to some people and not to others, then of course they're not a standard and they look like they're arbitrary. So let's give you an example. So go ahead, Jeff. So step one, maybe this week's value is respect. So the way that we define respect is you treat your coworkers, your customers, and everybody else with dignity, so that even the most vulnerable people in your organization or the most vulnerable people that are supporting your organization feel safe enough to contribute their best versions of themselves to our success. And people have different roles, but nobody is superior or inferior to anyone else. So that's a definition of respect. So step two then would be, hey, look, well, here's why this is important to us as an organization, because it provides the work environment where everybody, even our most vulnerable employees, contribute the best versions of themselves. And oh, by the way, workplace incivility lowers morale, lowers productivity, as Jeff mentioned. It costs an average of $14,000 per affected employee. So Jeff mentioned earlier also that, hey, look, your culture is revealing itself during this crisis. So there are probably there are going to be some things about your culture that are revealing themselves that maybe you want to sort of realign or tweak or fix. And here's a great way to do that. So then step three is, hey, gain input from the team on the leader and employee behavior. So ask them, hey, respect. Okay, so what are the leader behaviors that would be exhibited by a leader who's treating people with respect? What are the employee behaviors that we expect with this value of respect? And then step four, set those expectations. In our course, we'll show you some great examples of all that. And then step five, uphold the standards, but also check understanding. Make sure that as things permeate through the organization, that you're not getting the telephone tag problem, and people aren't misinterpreting things as you go through the chain. So so that's one very easy 5-step process to make your values more explicit and to realign those. Okay, so in the chat room, please type the one value or a value that you would use for this process to make leader and behavioral employees or behavioral expectations more explicit. So what are the things that you the value that you want to tackle? I'll pause there. We got some stuff coming in the chat, which is great. Nicole, what do you think?
Yeah, we've got a number of people saying trust. Eric notes inclusivity, John integrity, and Tom empathy, Brian integrity, as it's the foundation to many others.
Awesome. Those are all great inputs. And as you call, last time, our entire webinar focused on building trust. So we've got a ton of that for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Eric Kober.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks to everyone joining us today. I've loved these discussions we've been having over the course of the past several weeks, and I continue to learn and apply things myself. So I appreciate that. To continue today's great conversation, go ahead and build, Jeff. I want to focus our attention on expanding your influence through diversity and inclusion, also known to and referred further as D&I. I hope to share several steps which will help you not only increase your D&I, but also magnify your team's outcomes without introducing additional chaos as you face the challenges of this distributed and ever-changing environment? Go ahead and build, Jeff. In a recent study of leaders questioned, over 2/3 of them, 68% as you see there, feel they created empowering environments in which employees can be themselves, raise concerns, and innovate without fear of failure. Go ahead and build, Jeff. Well, the tough news of that, the same survey of the employees questioned, just a little over 1/3, or 36% of them, agree. And it's times like these right now that only exacerbate this gap. Many up-and-coming adaptive organizations like Visa, Accenture, Google, LinkedIn, or Procter & Gamble are recognizing this gap and are making progress. But this gap is still a major drain on productivity, morale, and most assuredly, many organizations' bottom line. Many of us have tried to diversify, or we've been in organizations that have clearly tried to diversify, to be more inclusive. Unfortunately, all too often, these efforts are half-hearted or do not get off the ground. If you've been a part of some half-hearted diversity or inclusion method, how did it make you feel? Go ahead and just share with me in the chat box real quick how failed D&I or lack of it made you feel. Nicole, what are you seeing? Anything coming in? Yeah, lack of trust. There we go.
Yeah, insulted, pointless, security, divided and detached.
Yeah, this idea of isolation. Sometimes it just seems to be diversity even for diversity's sake. Go ahead and build, Jeff. Our D&I aperture is often only focused on the big three: age, race, and gender. Bill, Jeff? And sometimes, even when we do try to expand, it's downright hard, no matter what direction you may try. Forcing it is not the way to go. Leading in it and through it is the way to go. D&I done authentically is sure to magnify your outcomes by increasing buy-in, employee engagement and loyalty, the passion to overcome obstacles, and the collaboration to make your vision a reality. The sum of the collective will always be far greater than the sum of its parts. Go ahead and build. So I ask you this: how do you do this without creating chaos in your decision-making groups and your organization? Next slide. I offer it's by leading into the fever. Go ahead and build, Jeff. Step one, lead by example. Inspire through your actions and encourage D&I through empathy and compassion. It's not our natural inclination to diversify or include others. Regardless of who we are, it takes sincere effort to find others that are different than ourselves, to purposefully include them in our meetings, conversations, and decision-making cycles, and to make it an inherent part of our organizational culture. It takes us as leaders to encourage this aspect of our culture. It can be as easy as this distributed environment as ensuring every virtual meeting is accessible by all. When in doubt, include more than less. Over-communicating is the key to leading through D&I in the virtual environment. It's critical that you and I, as leaders, prioritize that inclusion, now more than ever. We all need to be hyper-empathetic, see where those biases may show up, and be deliberate to encourage the appropriate level of care and compassion. Go ahead and build, Jeff. Take your temperature. There are many external ways to gain cultural audits or conduct digitally anonymous surveys, but one of the easiest ways to see where your culture is, just ask. Or have your division leaders ask. Come up with 3 to 5 very simple and sincere questions to ask your employees from top to bottom how they feel about diversity and inclusion in your culture. Sometimes the truth hurts, but you may also be delightfully surprised as you start asking the hard questions. Go ahead and build, Jeff. Identify your champions for change. As a leader, it's essential to find those that will be your key catalysts to embrace your desire for diversity and inclusion. It is at the division, department, and team level that true change is going to take effect. And only in your influence at the leader level will that change begin. Whether it's through your formal surveying or informal candid conversations, it is critical to find those that will help you emphasize the D&I campaign. Go ahead and build, Jeff. Turn up that rheostat. While it's important to have your trusted team members within your organization over time, it takes leader action policy in place to enforce the importance and positivity of your D&I. While policy should simply focus on the positive aspects of diversity and inclusion that it has on innovation, collaboration, and morale, there must also be a clear denouncement for non-tolerance of discriminatory behaviors. Go ahead and build, Jeff. And really lastly, it brings it all the way back around, but retake your temperature frequently and communicate it. After a set period of time, say 3 to 6 months, the last step to strengthening the D&I within your culture is reassessing how you're doing. You may even identify your own metrics, which give your organization its own D&I report card. The organizations that do best in diversity and inclusion are the ones that communicate about the importance of it openly and unabashedly, recognizing that every one of us has to fight for it because it's something worth fighting for. I just have one closing question for you to answer. Is your culture expanding your influence to magnify your outcomes? Go ahead and build. Catch the fever. Make your value of D&I explicit. Unless there's any questions, I'll be followed by my colleague, John O'Grady, and has some great stuff to share on capability versus capacity.
Jeff, go ahead. Thank you. So you know how it feels when you bear the mantle of responsibility for leading your people and your team through an austere environment, wrought with ambiguity, complexity, chaos, volatility, and even crisis. It can feel downright overwhelming, draining, and quite frankly, scary. I get it. I get it because I got it. And I got it when I was about 12 months out from deploying my organization and leading about 500 young men and women into combat in northern Afghanistan. And what I realized was it was going to be that very environment that I just spoke about, the one that can provide feelings of being overwhelmed as a leader, unsure of yourself, lacking confidence, and again, even scared at times. And it was gnawing at me because I knew I had great people around me. And I didn't think I should necessarily be feeling that way, but I needed to understand why I was feeling that way. And so what I realized was we were going to be deploying into that same type of environment. We were moving into the future, into a great unknown, a lot of complexity, variation in terrain, variation in weather, variation in types of people we would have to deal with. 8,000 square miles of terrain for a 500-person organization. To put that in context, Rhode Island is about 4.4 thousand square kilometers. We were going into 8,000 square kilometers. I needed to break that team up into approximately 5 to 6 100-person organizations and disperse it throughout that 8,000 square kilometers. So leading in a distributed manner, like many of you find yourselves right now because of the pandemic, is something as well that I knew we were going to have to navigate. And all of that meant a great unknown. And so what I figured out was, and it was in that moment that I realized we needed to embrace really a culture that valued capacity. And by capacity, lots of times people normally think, measurements of volume or size. I'm talking about capacity of the human domain, the capacity of the human capital, the capacity of not only myself, but the people that I was charged with leading. And that's what we decided to do. We really decided to figure out and say we were going to value capacity. And so, Jeff, if you go to the next slide, please, and I'll talk you through this a little bit more. Hopefully it'll become more clear. And so, again, it's this notion of capability. We were focused at that moment that I was having this great tension. We were focused very much on the capability of our people. How would they perform certain tasks under certain conditions? And all of that was predicated on things that had occurred in the past. You know, circumstances that other units had found themselves in, that other leaders had found themselves in, various tasks that we knew we would routinely likely be called upon to have to execute just based off of, you know, good professional knowledge. But again, that's capabilities, and that's based off of things that had happened in the past. So X occurred. Well, then we need to be able to do Y to respond to it properly and well. And it's a little bit like looking in the rearview mirror of your car, right? And you need to do that from time to time, clearly. So I'm not suggesting that capability isn't important, but when it comes to dealing with the forward-looking venture, going into the unknown and making sure you're doing it and you're positioned as well as humanly possible, and that your people have the necessary resources and resourcefulness to go ahead and handle those situations, you've got to be looking through the front windshield. And that's what that picture is describing or trying to convey in terms of this value, this culture of capacity. So Jeff, if you would please build. And so here's how these are defined, right? And again, capabilities, if you look at those two definitions, many of the words are the same. You know, a task, to a standard, under conditions, but there are changes in there, right? The capability is under specific conditions. Well, why? Well, again, because it's based off of what was known, what occurred in the past. Therefore, we need to be able to respond with the following skills, etc. That doesn't help in these types of situations. Doesn't help in the situation we find ourselves now. And it clearly, I knew, wasn't going to help my organization as we were planning to deploy to Afghanistan into that environment that I described. And so we really started focusing on capacity. And capacity is about how do you deal with the unknown? How do you deal with the future that none of us can predict? Now, if you believe you can predict the future, I would very much like it if you put in the chat room the $1 million lotto number, and I'll be sure to play that tonight. But otherwise, you probably want to start working on capacity inside your organization and not just capability. Again, capability is necessary, like the rearview mirror, but that windshield is far bigger than that rearview mirror, and you spend most of your time looking through that windshield than you do the rearview mirror. That's capacity. So how do we go about doing that? But Jeff, go ahead and build before we get to that. And so here's the question, right? You know, if you can't accurately predict the future, because I didn't see any lotto numbers come up in the chat box, then which best positions you to deal with the unknown? And again, I hopefully provided you a compelling argument that capacity has got to be a part of that. So how do we go about doing that? Jeff, if you build, go ahead. Right, so hey, here's a couple of easy, simple steps to at least get you started, okay? The first one is develop in people how to think versus telling them what to think, right? I mean, hey, look, I'm guilty of it from time to time as well. I'm far better than I was before I grasped and embraced this notion of capacity. But too often somebody comes in, asks the question, and you give them the answer, or you're there as the leader, and you want to tell people how to go ahead and start thinking about things, and telling them what to think versus how to think. The next one is develop leaders. So are you developing leaders, or are you developing just a whole bunch of followers? So that's another question that I pose it to you. But if you start developing leaders instead of developing followers, you're moving more towards capacity. again, a simple question, somebody comes in, they, hey, we got a problem, boss, or hey, what should I do, etc. We're hit with these all the time as leaders, whether it's in an email or whatever, and our natural inclination as the leader is to want to go ahead and immediately solve that problem. Well, you know what? Sometimes it's better off to have that problem solved at about an 80% solution and let them run with it because it's not critical. And so instead of giving the answer, go ahead and just give a question back and see how those individuals grow from a capability into a capacity. And then the last one would be, hey, grow, employ a growth mindset. And there's a whole bunch of work and stuff on that you can go ahead and delve into more deeply. In the interest of time, though, I'll start wrapping it up. And Jeff, if you'd build. And so the question becomes, and I'd like you to populate the chat room if you would, have you ever experienced a culture that values capacity in the way that I just described it? And if you did, what did it feel like? And conversely, if you didn't, you could offer what that felt like as well in the chat room. And so thanks very much for listening, folks. Hopefully this was beneficial to you. Nicole, I think we have some things going into the chat rooms. I don't know if you want to share one or two of those, perhaps.
Yeah. Actually, the SLA team here all went with empathy, and Eric notes enabled, Kit liberating, Gordon empowering, and able to do more beyond the mission. Andrea energized.
Great. All things that are desperately needed right now, and again, as you lead your organizations going forward. So. Thanks very much, folks, for the interaction. Really enjoyed sharing my part of this with you today and being part of this great team. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Tom. Tom, if you would, please.
Hey, thanks, John. Oh, hello from rainy Annapolis, Maryland. If you hear any booming in the background, that's we're having a little bit of thunder today, but that'll bring some great May flowers, right? But it's great to be part of this discussion. Culture is really important, sometimes undervalued. We've all seen or heard reports of displaced workers currently experiencing anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. That's definitely going to affect the culture of an organization. So I remember feeling all three of those on September 11th, 2001. I'm pretty old, so I was then commander in charge of a Navy jet transport squadron. You can see in these pictures. We were based outside Philadelphia, so pretty close to New York City. So, and of course near the Pennsylvania crash. So soon after the attacks, they shut down the whole national airspace. All aircraft had to land immediately. They locked down our base, sent most of the people home, and for weeks, very few people were allowed back on the base. So I had 250 sailors in my squadron. They were very anxious, feeling all the uncertainty, confusion, what's going on, are we going to get attacked again, etc. So personally, I was, relatively lucky, if you want to call it that. The very next day, September 12th, we were tasked with a mission, and again, the airspace was closed, but they let our aircraft, one aircraft, fly. We flew out to Oklahoma, I think Norman, Oklahoma, to pick up some very special cutting torch tools, and they needed them back at Newark Airport ASAP to try to cut away the wreckage of the World Trade Center and try to find more survivors. So we had a focus and a purpose for my crew that day, and I'll never forget that eerie silence on the radios with no other aircraft airborne over the United States. But we had a mission to focus on. It pushed away the fear, anxiety. We knew we were doing a great mission, hopefully to help save some lives. But the other 240 something folks in that squadron were stuck at home, not knowing what was happening. So I had to do something once I got back to try to cut through all that anxiety and uncertainty. And lacking a better idea and not a lot of great technology back then, I just set up an old-fashioned phone tree, call tree. So I called each of my department heads daily, and then they called all the middle managers, who in turn called all the each of their sailors. And we got the word out on what was happening, and we And that was when we checked in on everyone's well-being that way. And the lockdown lasted about 3 weeks, I think. But so in an extended situation with a distributed team, a similar approach is one way to allay your employees' fears and anxieties. Next slide, please. So if you want to hold meaningful calls with your distributed team, a way to do this is to prep for weekly conversations with them. And these here on the slide are some suggested conversation guidelines. So first, be as honest and transparent as you can. It's okay to admit that you don't know what the future holds. It's okay not to have all the answers. Second, try to be humble. You need to admit what you don't know. For instance, if an employee asks you whether there's going to be layoffs, and while you know that's in discussion, you aren't sure whether it'll happen, and you don't know, who's going to be let go. So you could say something like, "Well, I wish I could tell you exactly what's going to happen, but we're giving updates as soon as we know them." Next, be responsible. No matter what, if you haven't gotten the green light to share information about layoffs or pay cuts, you can't say anything. Don't even hint. Be compassionate and say, "Hey, we need to work together to do our best amid the uncertainty and challenges we're facing right now." And be consistent. Talking openly with your team is tougher if leadership above you is responding to the crisis in a way you don't really agree with. So you can make it sound like you're telling kind of the same truth, but you just have a slightly different spin on it. So for instance, top leadership lays out a remote policy requiring everyone to work from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. online. But you believe that giving people more leeway in how and when they work if they have other things they got to take care of. So you could spell out the policy and then just add, hey, during these stressful times, you trust them to use their best judgment. Fifth, also seek to inspire. Rise to the occasion. Always try to affirm the capabilities of your team and tell them that you believe in each and every one of their capabilities. And we can do this together. Stress that you believe in the long-term future of your organization. And your tone probably shouldn't be too positive, but certainly not too negative. And lastly, offer to support and practice empathy. It's important to make a special effort to understand your team members' individual worries and stresses. So be an active listener to what people are asking and saying. Most people, they need to hear that we're going to be okay. So give every reassurance you can, and then ask what you can do to help. Next slide, please, Jeff. So here's a simple 3-step process to manage the information flow with your distributed team, along with a couple of do's and don'ts. So step 1, communicate more often than usual. You've heard that today, I know. For instance, every Monday you can meet with everyone on the team, and then just meet one-on-one with your core group of managers a couple times a week. Do let your people know that everyone, including leadership, has experienced the same trials and tribulations as they are, and they're not alone. And don't speculate if you don't know what's going to happen next. Be honest and stick to the facts on the ground. Step 2, use the conversation guidelines I introduced on that previous slide for your one-on-one check-in. Always do start the discussion by telling your teammates something positive about their performance. Ask them what they think their strengths are and how they plan to use them during this crisis. Trying to spin it to a positive. And don't sugarcoat the situation. If you do, they might think you're either lying or you're just totally out of touch. Step 3, do your best to instill confidence in your middle managers. Let them feel comfortable and committed to the message from leadership before relaying it to the fellow employees. Encourage your managers to be empathetic and transparent with their teams and not be shy in leading them in the direction we all agree is best. This inspires a culture of unity across the entire company, which is essential in times like this. So do end your discussion on a positive note. Highlight victories, however small. And don't forget to offer support. Ask them what you can do to help make their telework situation better. So, question for the group. In the chat box, what positive message have you conveyed to your team in order to try to quell their fears and uncertainties during this crisis? Do you have a standard theme you use? I like to say that Although this is a unique situation, hey, as Americans, we've overcome world wars, 9/11, the 2008 recession. This is different and unique, but there's always opportunities to grow if we keep our wits about us and think. You got anything, Nicole?
Yeah, no, that was a really great point, Tom, that you just made. Gordon notes we're an agile organization. John, be comfortable being uncomfortable. It's where the growth is, which is so true. You don't grow if you're not tested and you're not uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And if we concentrate on trying to find, make the lemonade, so to speak, during this time, a lot of the anxieties and fears can be, pushed aside, washed away if we can concentrate on moving the organization forward. And again, finding those diamonds in the rough and taking advantage of them. Great. Well, thanks so much. I'll kick it back to Jeff.
Great. Thanks, Tom, and great tips no matter the circumstances. Very useful stuff there. So our mission at the Strategic Leaders Academy is to help you lead through this crisis and shape your new normal by providing practical ways to improve your leadership, culture, and strategy. We'd like to do that with you and your teams. Here's another great testimonial we received from Michelle Flournoy, CEO of West Exec, who discusses the impact of leader diversity, boosting commitment, and the power of culture on retention, engagement, and morale. Okay, now let's go back to where we started and look again at the picture board we showed at the beginning. Take 30 seconds, pick the image that best reflects your top takeaway from this discussion. So, go.
Yeah, we've got Jeff, we've got John responding that the sun looking bright, the globe from Eric, there's a world of opportunity before us. And Andrea notes the bike, a way forward. Gordon, mountains, a vision for a way ahead. And and Kit notes the I, seeing clearly on how to move forward. Chris, the paint canvas, and Dan, the sun. So lots of good responses.
All great stuff. Thank you very much, Nicole. And thanks to all of you. It's been a pleasure interacting with you over the last hour or so. And I'm now going to hand it over to Chris Kalinda for final thoughts and how we are prepared to continue to support you and your people through this crisis and beyond. So over to you, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, so, leading, just go ahead to the next one. Yeah, there you go. All right, so leading through a long duration crisis is kind of like building your parachute on the way down. So you've got time, but we don't have time to waste. And in a crisis like this, you got to do three things. First, you got to protect your team by actually getting that parachute built. You've got to extend your flight time so you get enough time to build the parachute, get that good canopy. And then finally, you've got to pivot successfully after you land and drive on. So of course, like with this parachute, it helps to have a tandem so you can talk through the challenges and vet ideas with somebody who just has your best interests in mind. As you know, you can't think out loud in front of your team or engage in speculation about the future, because all that does is it fuels their anxiety, and your employees are going to focus more on their anxiety than they are about being productive and helping you build that parachute. So go ahead and build, Jeff. Now, of course, if you got that good tandem, you get that parachute built, once you land safely and pivot successfully into the new normal and drive on, you're going to be successful, just like this chap here. So, of course, all of us at SLA are great tandem partners for high-performing leaders. And as Jeff mentioned earlier, we've all led organizations successfully through these kind of long-duration crises through combat. And our clients have grown by over $25 million and counting. So we know how to help you protect your team by getting that parachute built, how to extend that flight time, and finally, how to pivot successfully after you land and drive on. So go ahead with the next slide, Jeff. Yes, so here's 4 ways that we work with you. At the bottom, just highlighting our 3-month strategic advising program. It comes at a cost of about $10,000. And of course, we all guarantee the quality of our work. And if you're not seeing results after 90 days, we keep working with you until you do. Now, of course, the COVID crisis and the economic shutdown have changed the marketplace in fundamental ways. So to help as many people through the crisis, go ahead with the next slide, Jeff. We've added a special page to our website. So the Crisis Lifecycl page has all of our webinars, our articles, our other tools and resources that help you build that parachute so you protect your team, extend your flight time, and land safely. So, and for a lot of folks, this all the free resources are good enough. But we also wanted to provide you with an extra level of support if you don't want to build the parachute on your own. So go ahead with the next slide, Jeff. So we've designed this course leading through the COVID-19 crisis as a way to give you a new level of support. So it's a 7-week course that takes you step by step to protect your team, extend your flight time, and pivot successfully. So Nicole is going to put the course link in the chat room now. Go ahead with the build. So these are the 7 modules that you're gonna see. Takes you all the way through the step-by-step process. Today we talked about strengthening your culture. We're also going to talk about scenario planning to help you pivot successfully, etc. Go ahead with the build, Jeff. And one more. So here's what you get in those with the 7 modules. So you're going to get 7 1-hour weekly Zoom calls so you can engage directly with your SLA team and your other high-performing participants. Of course, we're much smarter together than if we try to figure out something on our own. Now, you're also going to get unlimited access to your personal SLA advisor. So this is one of the 5 of us, and you're going to get that for the entire course. So yeah, we match you up with one of the 5 of us. So you've got your tandem. Our one-on-one intensive advising programs we mentioned is like $10,000. So to help as many people as possible in these unprecedented times, and help you lead your team through the crisis and beyond, we're offering this course for less than 1/10 of that. Go ahead and just kind of build. So it's a great way to protect your team, extend your flight time, pivot successfully. So you can do it alone with our webinars, articles, our tools, resources, and your own smarts, and that's great. Or you can have a tandem, whichever is going to work better for you. But so this course, if you join, is going to begin on May 14th. Go ahead, Jeff. And it's going to meet weekly for 7 weeks. And the first 10 to sign up are going to get an extra hour with your SLA mentor in a one-on-one Zoom session. So of course, the sooner you sign up, the sooner you get your personal advisor. If you sign up today, it's an extra 2 weeks of exclusive access to one of us. So going through this course as a leadership team can also be really effective. So we can offer team rates too if you want to have your leadership team go through it with us. So you're going to be building your parachute with common purpose and understanding among your entire team. You also get our two famous guarantees. So guarantee number 1, 30-day money back, no questions asked. So engage in the course for 30 days. That's over half the course. You're going to know whether or not that this course is for you. And if it turns out you just don't like the course, or you don't like the logo on my background, or whatever, just let me know. No questions asked. Hey, Chris, I'm not getting value out of the course. Boom, I'll refund every penny. Second is our results guarantee. So if you've completed all the work and after 90 days you're still not seeing results, we are going to work with you until you do, or refund your entire investment. So you've got the link in the chat room. You got our 2 ironclad guarantees. And of course, we'll stand by after the call to answer your questions, or you could just simply email me your questions too. Go ahead with the next slide, Jeff. Okay, so our next webinar is going to be on scenario planning. So we're going to talk you through ways to do scenario planning that will help you kind of spine the uncertainty, if you will, and get you ready to pivot successfully into whatever new normal emerges. So I appreciate everybody's participation here, and I will stand by for any questions that you might have.